Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. Edina Eye, Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services but dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome to another session of Access to Democracy. Alan Miller back with you with one of our frequent and favorite guests. What can you say about Professor David Schultz, who's now a full professor of both political science and legal studies at Hamline University and Hamline Law School? You know him from media worldwide, nationwide. He's written about 40 books and hundreds of articles. What you don't know is that he's also a vintner of some reputation, and we have certainly enjoyed his Thanksgiving wines, not this year, unfortunately, but what he doesn't know is that my classmate was recently elected president of the United States. So I can see that struck him. Actually, I'm a little bit older than the president, and I got my first degree in LLB at Syracuse 10 years before he did, but then I was awarded a JD in the year that he graduated, 1968. So we are classmates of a sort. His son Bo also is a graduate, late son Bo of Syracuse Law School, and a daughter from another school there. Orange runs through our blood, but not through our president's face, hopefully. David, what happened in this election?
Boy, that's a simple answer, a simple question, but a hard answer. But actually, I'll give you a really simple answer. At the end of the day, it was what? This was a referendum on Donald Trump. It's what we always knew it was going to be. And what's really interesting to think about this election is how, in many ways, it always was going to be about the president. We know that when presidents run for a second term, it's inevitably a referendum on them. And I want to tell an interesting story. I've done 2 editions of my book, Presidential Swing States. The whole premise of the book is that that presidential elections are largely over in about 40 or so states well before they start because of the existence of the Electoral College, the winner take all in 48 of 50 states, and the partisan layout in the states. Last December, a year ago from now, I was trying to calculate what chapters to include in the 3rd edition of my Presidential Swing States book. And a year ago, I said, well, the presidential race was largely going to be over in 43 states, and that the presidential race would come down to the states of Arizona, Florida, Michigan, Minnesota, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And guess what? it largely came down to those 7
Really
states.
did. That was prophetic.
Yeah.
Certainly
And
was.
right. And the reason why this is important is that I know Alan, our listeners are probably going to say to me, well, last December, you couldn't have foreseen the pandemic, which of course I could not, the economy, or all the various events surrounding George Floyd. And that's true. But what we realize, and there's some data now pointing this out, is that those 3 events largely did not, in the macro sense, affect the election. In the sense that for the last 6 months, there's been a stability in the public opinion polls that had Biden with a popular vote lead of about 6 million votes, which is what he won by. And that we always knew it was going to be close and come down to those 6 states in the Electoral College, and it did. And how people viewed George Floyd, his death, the peaceful protests afterwards, the riots, the pandemic, the coronavirus, all were viewed through the lens of what? How they think about Donald Trump. If you like Trump, then you had one set of views on those. If you dislike them, another. And so I just mention this because the way to explain this election was to say it was just about Donald Trump at the end of the day.
And interesting, you talk about Biden's margin. Just a couple of hours ago, the latest count was that he is now ahead by over 7 million votes, while several states are still counting. So I would say that's a rather substantial margin, Electoral College or not, a 7 million vote differential.
No, you're absolutely correct. And again, that's relatively consistent with what I think a lot of the public opinion polls were suggesting. And I mention this because there's been a lot of talk in the last few weeks to say that the public opinion polls largely blew it again this time. And the answer is they didn't. Again, for the last 6 months, they were saying Biden had a pretty good lead, popular vote, 7 million votes. I would say that's a pretty decisive victory by any counts here. And we're saying that it was going to be close, but nonetheless, that Biden would probably pull it off in the Electoral College. And so all of this, again, pans out of making that point that when I tell people that one of the big takeaways from this election is, first, that the election was largely predictable, but 2, the second big takeaway is the fact that it was an election where we entered it very divided, and we're exiting this election very divided. And that's true. We are an incredibly politically divided country at this point, with no immediate sign that it's going to heal.
Do you think that that's the reason that Biden had no coattails, that the Republicans actually did better, both Senate-wise? Well, it's pretty stagnant there, the count, but certainly in the House of Representatives, where they picked up quite a few seats. And usually a president has coattails. Biden didn't seem to have any coattails.
Yeah, he didn't have coattails for, I think, a couple of reasons. One of them is, and we don't know this yet, once all the votes come in, we're going to be able to look at this. I have a theory that besides the fact that this was an election that was simply a referendum on Trump, which means lots of people showed up, voted for president, cast the ballot for Biden, but perhaps did not vote down ballot. And I suspect that's true, but again, we don't have enough information on that. So that's one. The second thing is, I'll just walk back a little bit from my statement before, where I said that nothing really mattered in terms of this election besides Trump. We do have some evidence that the defund the police movement in Minneapolis, as well as let's say the post George Floyd riots, where Trump made law and order an issue, did hurt Democrats across the country in some of the critical suburbs and races, and that could have made a difference. And so the polling data afterwards and the exit polling data is suggesting that also mitigated the coattail effect for Joe Biden.
What do you think of Biden's choices to this point for his cabinet and the picks that he's made so far, in terms of really their experience and his promise of really diversity?
Well, first, what he's really put the emphasis on so far is an experience that he's putting Washington insiders are people who know their way around Washington in. And again, the emphasis seems to be on people, let's say, who have got lots of experience, for example, State Department foreign policy experience in that area. And on the one level, that's very good. That if there's one thing that I think is good after 4 years of Donald Trump, just running as somebody who's quiet and competent and putting quiet and competent people in place, I think is good. However, at the same time, what Biden isn't doing effectively at this point is diversifying his cabinet. And that, I think, we still have to see what the final picture is going to look like. But one would like to see that by the time the whole thing is filled out at cabinet level and at sub-cabinet level, one hopes there'll be greater diversity, because it was what? It was Black America, Hispanic America, people of color came out in very strong percentages to support him. And in part, what I think he needs to do is to not reward, that's not the word I'm using for here, but to recognize that there are a lot of talented people of color and that they need to be put into critical positions of power so that they are in the position of helping formulate policy to address the problems that George Floyd really brought back to light in America.
And not only in America, but around the world. The George Floyd murder, and I describe it as a murder, I think appropriately, was like something that lit the fires around the world for racial prejudice. And we've had so many incidents since then, only to reinforce that concept. Now, the NAACP met with President-elect Biden yesterday, and they pushed for a Black attorney general. What do you think of that? I think that we want the best person for attorney general, and that, I'm sure that there are a lot of candidates, several I can think of, but after what we have with Attorney General Barr, we really need an aggressive, good, talented attorney general.
Well, we need, you're right, absolutely correct. We just first need a competent, aggressive, and I'm going to say independent attorney general. And what I mean by independent is that an attorney general who's not just the lapdog for the president of the United States, but somebody who's going to stand up for, just in case the president does something wrong, who's also going to hold the president accountable. But I think what we need even more important, or just as important, is that the assistant attorney general in terms of civil rights, I think, is going to be an incredibly important person in terms of a selection. And that, I think, is critical. I also think that after being demoralized for 4 years, the Civil Rights Division for the Justice Department needs to be invigorated or reinvigorated. I'm not sure which word I'm looking for at this point. So there's a lot of work that the next Attorney General needs to do to address the overall problems with the Department of Justice and how it's been demoralized. But there's no question that I think the challenge going forward is especially within the Civil Rights Division at this point. And there is no doubt across the country, many qualified people, including people of color, who I think would be excellent for that position.
Now, there have been many very talented and career people who've been fired by Trump. I understand there's a provision in law, and I'm not familiar with it, that they can be hired back at their former positions. Do you think that it's feasible? Do you think that those who haven't moved on to more lucrative jobs in the private sector, do you think that they would be interested in coming back? Do you think that they can come back? What's your thoughts about that?
Well, I think what we don't want to see occurring in Washington is a complete, let's say, use the phrase brain drain or talent drain. Is that what I think what Biden can do? And I view Biden as a transition president. And what I mean by that, he is providing the transition or gateway to the next generation of the Democratic Party. He's providing a transition to, I think, the next generation of leadership in Washington, D.C. And I think one of the things that he can do or should do is affect the balance, a balance between having the experienced people who are there, at the same time having the mentor and provide the transition for the next generation of people coming up. So the long-winded answer to a very good question here is that I think in some cases it clearly makes sense to say these people should be allowed to come back, and we should encourage them, so that we can provide the experience, the talent, the training, to really develop the new generation of leadership in the United States. And that's what's been one of the damaging things of the Trump era in terms of decimating the ranks of skilled people across all areas, civil rights, foreign service, and so forth, and not replacing them with a new generation of people who can carry on. And this is what I think is one of Biden's, let us kind of call it his HR or civil service or personnel tasks, is again affecting that transition.
Now, I've written on my blog for a couple of years that I felt that Trump is not only unhinged and unbalanced, but that he is really certifiably insane. And I called upon the cabinet and both the vice president to utilize the 25th Amendment and remove him. I think there are probably some Republicans today who are sorry that they didn't do that. But what do you think of his mental state? Is he just a self-centered narcissist, or is he really insane?
Well, I always tell people I have a PhD on my shoulder. I don't have an MD, so maybe not qualified to make a medical diagnosis, but at the very least, he seems narcissistic, self-centered. He reminds me of all the worst traits of a 5-year-old, if everybody gets what I'm talking about here. I read Mary Trump's book about him, and she actually is a psychologist, and she paints the picture of somebody who is the product of an incredibly dysfunctional family, of which there was alcoholism, all types of things in it. Clearly, we can say at the very least, he has not acted in a way where he's showing that he's putting the best interest of the nation at heart. I mean, think about what's happened since Election Day. And I'm going to forget the exact numbers, but you may know them. Unfortunately, how many tens of thousands of people have died or have been infected with the coronavirus since Election Day? And all Trump is doing is brooding like Macbeth, all about his own personal fate in life, and doesn't seem to care about the fact that, I'll use another metaphor, that Rome is burning while Nero or Trump is fiddling around.
I have used that analogy actually in some of my writings. It's funny because when it looked like he was going to get the nomination back in 2016, the first blog that I put on my blog was comparing him to the Pied Piper of Hamline, who led everybody, followed him blindly into the ocean over his dispute with the mayor of Hamline. And as I look back on it, I repeated it recently simply because I think it was so appropriate, with these blind followers who would go to their own destruction with this man.
Yeah. I remember when I was in high school watching a science video about the lemons going, the little small furry animals, lemons going off of cliffs or something like that. It's sort of the same thing there. Yeah, I think one of the things that we could benefit from as a society is bringing back a body of literature that was written post-World War II. And it was a literature written by people like Theodore Adorno, which are called The Authoritarian Personality, Erik Erikson, and a bunch of other psychologists who are trying to understand something about the psychology of power, the psychology of charismatic leadership. And what is scary here is the fact that at the end of the day, Trump still got what? 70 million plus votes, the second greatest number of votes ever for a presidential candidate in American history, and that he has a devoted, loyal following. Many people are thinking that with Trump out of office, that the Trumpistas will disappear. In many ways, Trump is the figurehead for a lot of forces going on in our society that help create him. Some of them about economics, some of them racial, some of them trending with the media. But one of the things that's going to be interesting to see now is what holds together the Trump movement, the Trumpistas, with him out of office. What I suspect it's going to be is what? Trump himself. I saw on the December 4th news in the Washington Post that the Trump campaign has raised $200 million since Election Day, some of it for litigation, most of it looking like what? He might very well use that for a political action committee or for other things to stay in the political limelight for the next 4 years. And so he's not going away. The movement that created him is not going away. And the forces that have generated this blind allegiance to him haven't gone away.
But that presupposes that he's going to be free just to run around in politics. What about all these lawsuits that are pending? What about the 26 women who said that they were molested by him? The 2 who were paid off, for which his ex-attorney went to jail. What about the ones that are pending with New York and the New York Attorney General, as well as the city of New York? And there was just another article in the paper today, in the New York Times today, about a bunch of tenants who found out that they were ripped off in terms of rent raises under New York's rent law, where the Trump people funneled thousands of dollars into phony improvement, I should say, checks or balances or bills or things like that. And all these things, I think, are going to come to fruition one after another. Is he going to have time to be Donald Trump and fly all over the country? And are these people going to have blind allegiance when they see his tax returns and when they see that he cheated to the degree that he did?
Well, first off, I don't think any amount of information about his tax returns, sexual scandals, or anything are going to turn his supporters away from him. I still think his comment that he made many years ago, that he could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody with a gun and the supporters wouldn't care, I think he was absolutely correct in terms of that blind allegiance. On the other hand, I think you make a good point. Cyrus Vance Jr., who is the Manhattan Borough District Attorney, is looking like he's probably going to indict him once he's no longer in office. And what it's looking like at this point, it's a combination of both tax fraud with the state of New York, as well as what's looking increasingly like some type of fraud against banks, bank fraud or investor fraud. Now, he's facing multiple lawsuits. He's also facing a lot of debts, in terms of, some estimates are $300 to $400 million in debts that are going to come due not long after he's president. If he were smart, he made a statement a few months ago and he said that if he loses, he's going to leave the country. He probably should leave the country, because he may very well be facing indictments and he may need to head out of the country to escape some of those. But no, he's facing major problems, and it will be curious to see how he navigates those, because these lawsuits at the state level and civil lawsuits are beyond the reach of any pardoning power by a president, whether it's him or any other president.
And we have a few minutes left to talk about the pardons, but there was also another lawsuit that was started just a few days ago, or at least it's an FBI investigation, and part of the unredacted material was released by Judge Howell in terms of a bribery for money, a bribery for pardons, that one, we don't even have the background on that one yet, but that would be another one. But what do you think about blanket pardons for everybody, and can he pardon himself?
Well, first off, he has broad authority to pardon people who have been convicted of federal crimes or even anticipation of federal crimes. And we know that because when Ford pardoned Nixon before he was indicted. So the courts are going to give the president broad leeway, probably including his family and friends. There's nobody, absolutely nobody, who I think has a credible law degree in the world who thinks the president can pardon himself. That the basic principles of law, saying that you can commit a crime and profit from it, and pardon yourself, basically being above the law. I don't think anybody agrees, and I would be stunned if even this Supreme Court would go along with that, no matter how conservative they are. But what would be interesting is many of us have argued that the pardoning power is way too broad to start with. And if we now have a pardons for money, a bribery issue here, this may give the Supreme Court an opportunity to revisit its case law on presidential pardonings that's 150 years old, and many of us who think it's way out of date in terms of how broad it is. And it would be good. It would be good if the courts trimmed back on that power.
Now, one by one, the big name law firms have walked away from him, leaving him with his chief attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who years ago had a really good reputation in the city of New York, but he seems to be a different person today. How has Giuliani not been the subject of any ethical complaints or through bar associations for some of the allegations that he and some of the people who surround him have made, who are also attorneys?
Well, this is interesting. I wrote about a year ago in one of my columns that there are a variety of both state bar, in this case, maybe New York, where I think he's still licensed, that could go after him for bringing non-meritorious claims and for other behavior that all of us as lawyers have to comply with. Had I done even a half of what Giuliani has done as a lawyer, I would have faced disciplinary proceedings. However, what people forgot is that about 2 weeks ago, a congressperson in New Jersey, member of Congress, has now filed ethics complaints against Rudy Giuliani in 5 different states where he's practicing, alleging a variety of inappropriate behavior and urging the offices of professional responsibility, the disciplinary bodies, to take action against Giuliani. I suspect nothing will happen while Trump is still president, but this will be interesting to see how these disciplinary proceedings proceed into next year when he no longer has Donald Trump as kind of his protector.
Professor Richard Painter from the University of Minnesota, who was one of the Bush, I think he was the chief Bush ethics lawyer, has also filed ethics complaints. I think about Bill Barr. I don't think about Giuliani. We don't have time to discuss Bill Barr, whose career really came in with a flourish and is going out with a pounding, and it's unfortunate. But there's so many things other that we wanted to talk about, David, and we just haven't had time to reach them in this half-hour segment. So we're going to have you back in a month or two to follow up. And we've been talking with Professor David Schultz, who's really world-renowned, and it's been a pleasure. He always is not only an informant, but he gives us an education. And David, thank you for taking time once again for Access to Democracy.
My pleasure, and thank you to the audience.